And I'm just looking at this wondering if I should be building the flowers up a little more first and then come in with that dark layer. This is always a decision, and one reason to come in and paint on those flowers first is that when I come in with that really dark behind here, I'm going to run the risk of maybe having it run into the red if I paint the red in on top of there. So I'm going to back up and say no, I'm not going to start with the green next. I'm going to start with that darker red next. Now let's see. We need this brush and a slightly smaller brush if I want to at this point. So I'm going to need a medium-sized brush, in which I don't like this one. Medium-sized brush, that's the one I want to play with. I really like these yellows that I've got on here, and I probably won't do more with them, but I am finding that the reds on the flowers need to go a bit darker. Let's start over in here. And okay, I'm seeing a petal here. This is that same red that I had worked with before, but now it's a little bit drier. And so it is going to go down here a little bit different. I want to paint around some of these yellow spaces, leave those yellow. Don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this, but I do want to enrichen some of these colors. I just feel like they should be going a little stronger, and maybe leaving a little bit of light behind here and there. So just making these a little bit stronger, brighter colors. And let's let some of that stand out there. Leave some of that white behind. It's this thing of, you know, how bright and light do I get? How do I leave some darker places behind? Now I've got some reds here that are a little bit darker, and this has got to be, I don't want to get them muddy looking, but I want a gradation there. Then I've got this beautiful yellow space that's left behind. Am I ready for this? I can grade this just a little bit so that it's still bright. We're joining a couple of these little groups together. It's a little bit different than what I had. I'm not sure what I can do. Maybe some of these areas need to be a little more orange. So let me come in with this orange color. Just wanting to sort of paint these loosely in the direction that I see those flowers going. And then it's going to be a darker red back in here, but I'm thinking it needs to be an even darker red, so I'm going to add a little bit of quinacridone rose to my red here, just to make it a little bit darker red. Yes, I think I like that better. Still just trying to do this pretty loose. There's a yellow area that's left behind there. I'm going to leave that one alone and come back and paint that later, because then it'll show a little bit. Some of this is a little lighter up there. I could get super detailed here, and I don't want to get super detailed. I want to just sort of be thinking about this as big shapes, and then how do those yellows work in there. Okay, and then this is another petal that runs across through here, Really have to look at my photograph fairly frequently. And this is a little lighter up on the top edge of this, so let's just thin my paint a little. Let that be a little lighter up there. Okay, this is a place that's all yellow, and then we've got some more of those reds in there. I'm not trying to get these flowers entirely accurate. Now this flower is that flower, so let's see what we can do here. My yellow stops there, and then we paint right up into these flowers, get that shape. Just try and be a little bold with this. Really think about shapes as I'm putting this down. What happens with that yellow bit as it runs down into there? There we go. Let it find some of these shapes as I paint these on here. And there's some beautiful bits of yellow that happen. Oh, now this, we actually need to bring these back up into there again. That's fine. And then there's a yellow shape. It's going to run off through there. That's a little bit darker in it. Okay. I'm wanting to get the feeling of this as much as anything else. And so it can be a little bit different than what I see there, as long as I'm still getting the sense of it. We'll come back in and do those little dark marks that are in those yellow spaces later. And okay, it's not entirely accurate, as I said, but I'm not going to worry about that. There's some little marks that become important. So just sort of roughing this in. It was a good way to sort of describe it, just roughing it in, finding the spaces as we come across through here. Now this one, yeah, that's yellow stop there. This is beautiful. They run down in little angles here. Sometimes just painting boldly, even though you don't feel like you should, is the thing to do. And that stops in through there. And I'm trying to sort of look at this and see what's happening here and then think about it. I lightened that a little bit, but I like that there's a little light on there. There's some stamens that come up through there that we may not be able to capture. Now this is going to come back in behind here because there's a petal that comes in there. And it's coming to the top of where those yellow spaces are, and then that draws out into there. Sometimes you just don't want to spend too much time worrying about it, because if you do, you're gonna be fussing with it too much. And then we have a stamen and some of these pollen pistils, the stamens and pistil. Okay. There's a nice little shape right in on that flower where the stamens come out of the center. That's important. And even if I don't get a lot else accurate, I want to get that accurate. And then this little guy is one of those buds, and he comes down into there. Okay, let's petals that run through here. Needed to come a little bit. You know, when we're painting, we have to make these choices. Are we going to be super detailed and get this absolutely accurate, photographically accurate, or are we going to just get the feeling of it? And I'm just wanting to get the feeling of it. I don't want to get this totally accurate. I want it somewhat accurate, but not 100% accurate. And down in here, there's a few little centers that maybe are happening. Come back in and just find the edge, let those break apart just a tiny bit there. Okay. Now, let's see, this feels like it still needs a little bit more paint on it. And there was a yellowness right there that I've lost a little bit. Let's just throw some yellow back into that. Now, maybe some of these yellow spaces still need a little more yellow paint on them. Yellow is a color that you've got to be very careful with because it's easy to get too much yellow on, and then it looks just heavy. It doesn't get that bright lightness. So I've got to be a little careful here adding this yellow in here. And unfortunately, there's a few places that maybe should have been left white, and then I could have thrown the yellow in on top of it. And this is one of them right here. And I'm going to pull this yellow up into here just a little bit more. Let that dry. I could build this background up with 4 or 5 layers, but I think I'm going to just sort of do one more, or maybe 2 more dark bits on here. But, so what we need to think about next on this is where were those dark areas? Remember when we first looked at this, our little thumbnail sketch, we said that there was a triangle that was mostly dark over in this side, and then some little pieces of dark over in here. So what I've done now is that I've mixed up 2 dark greens. One of them is made with a sap green and ultramarine blue, and one of them is made with sap green and phthalo blue with a little bit of burnt sienna added into it. And so now I'm going to start building up some of those darker spaces, and when I do, it's going to bring out some of the colors of these flowers a bit more. Now, our next thing that is going to start making this really stand out is when we start getting our dark greens in on top of here, and this has got to be dry before I can do that. Let me just do a little bit of it right now. Now, when I put the dark green in, I also want to let some of that mid-tone green stay behind to become leaves, branches. I want you to see how when we start getting this dark in here, and you notice I've just come in here in the middle, and I should have started up in that corner, but I wanted to see how this was going to work with my main subject. And as I paint around that main subject, I can define it, get the final definition of it. Now we've got some leaves that are going to come off to the side there. And I could have been a darker green behind there before I finish this. Oh, I'm going to let that dry and then come back in and put a green in on top of it. But let's... Margaret, you shouldn't be doing that. This needs to come along the edge of that and then work its way out. Okay. What I decided I needed to do here was to back off of this just a little bit and come in with this mid-tone green, mid-tone dark green. And then I'll come back in and I'll get some more dark pieces put on top of there. So this is the point when I'm really defining the edge of those flowers. So I need to really pay attention to how I come up next to those flowers, because this will define what those look like. Notice that I have my little finger on the page, and I only do a little bit of this at a time, and then just bring it out and make it sort of uneven at the edge, so that when I go to join some other pieces on here, it's not going to look totally wrong. And then I can come back in and I can fill in some of this other space and maybe leave some of those lighter pieces behind. When I come up and find this flower up here, maybe I want to take a little bit off of that side of it there. Little line before it becomes something that I don't want in there. I always find this so interesting, how when you go to start putting these darks in like this, it creates a whole different mood on the piece than when you had those mid-tones there. Or you had the light spaces, and now we want to leave some light spaces, let it go in some different directions. I had a stem marked there. some light bits showing through, so we don't have to paint over everything. We can leave some of that as light bits. But I don't want this whole row of little light bits up here, so let's get rid of those. That just looks like I didn't get it painted up to the edge of the page. Let some of these darks go all the way out, and maybe some of them come in at angles. And then I can find a few more real dark places that are going to be between what would be leaves or stems. Some more of this is going to come back over here, get behind these flowers. But there's some lights that stick out here, so we don't necessarily want this to be 100%. Let's see this. If we paint this in between here, that will break those flowers apart. And I can paint that in between there. We find that stem. And I'm not trying to be totally accurate. I just want the spaces to sort of go in the type of angles that I'm seeing there. Some of this can go just a wee touch darker. I'm going to step back just a little bit to see what I'm doing. Now down in here, space between these two sets of flowers, I'm just looking at that little negative space that's being created in there. And it's important that I think about how this comes up to the flowers, because if I just leave it without paying attention to that, then it loses that definition that I want on the edge of those flowers. So I need to be aware of how this comes up to the flowers. And it's not necessarily dark everywhere, but there are dark places, and these dark places will help make other things stand out more. And this is where we had a fair amount of light. We don't want this as dark. That stem sort of pass through there. Here's another place where this is pretty dark, and it helps define the edge of that flower. I think there was another red flower underneath it there, but we've lost it, and it doesn't really matter. I don't think that that was an important part of, but what I do need to define is the shape of that bud. Maybe some of this other blue in here. Let's just let this come in and sort of like little branches, little shapes. I really like how, and then some of these marks they're not all the same direction, so I'm doing some back and forth and diagonals in there to bring a little feeling of that coming through there. Maybe that needs to come down a little smaller there. Find the edge of this flower. There was another bud back there that I took out. Didn't feel like it was really adding to the ambiance of things. Let's get that a little darker there. Let's get some of this pale green maybe back in there a little bit. Needs to go a little darker underneath there. And then a lot of this is staying lighter. Let's go with my real dark one here. just a little bit of sap green to work in here. Didn't want this too dreadfully dark down in this corner, so I'm just putting a little sap green back in here to keep a color. I'm feeling like I need to stop for a minute, get a breath of air, so I'm going to go ahead and stop.